The room fell silent so suddenly that even the violinist stopped playing. More than 100 guests stood frozen inside the bright afternoon banquet hall as my husband slowly lowered his champagne glass, looked directly into my eyes, and called me the one thing I never imagined hearing after 22 years of marriage. He called me a family destroyer. His voice echoed across the decorated hall prepared for his mother's 70th birthday celebration. Faces turned toward me. Some looked shocked. Others looked satisfied. A few lowered their heads because they already knew secrets that had been buried for years. What nobody realized was that before the sun went down, 8 different relationships would collapse under the weight of the truth. Marriages would end. Engagements would be cancelled. Lifelong friendships would shatter. Parents would lose the trust of their children. And the woman accused of destroying a family would become the only person brave enough to stop generations of lies. Before we begin this emotional story, please take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who still believes kindness and honesty can change lives, and don't forget to subscribe to Tales Maybe if you believe everyone deserves a second chance and that truth always finds its way into the light. My name is Mireya Lawson, and until that afternoon, I believed silence was the same thing as peace. I was 48 years old, worked as a pediatric occupational therapist, and had spent most of my adult life making sure everyone around me felt comfortable. I remembered birthdays without reminders, cooked holiday meals for 40 people, helped neighbors through illnesses, and somehow became the unofficial problem solver for both my own relatives and my husband's enormous family. My husband, Rowan Lawson, often joked that I carried the entire family on my shoulders. People laughed because they thought he was complimenting me. I laughed too. Now I understand that sometimes the jokes people repeat are actually confessions hiding in plain sight. His mother, Celestine Lawson, had always been the center of every celebration. She was admired throughout the community for organizing charity drives, mentoring young couples, and remembering everyone's birthdays. If someone asked about the perfect mother, her name always appeared first. Very few people knew another version of Celestine. She believed appearances mattered more than feelings. If someone cried, she told them to smile. If someone struggled, she reminded them that successful families never discussed problems publicly. She often said that truth should never become more important than reputation. For 22 years, I tried to live by those rules because I loved Rowan deeply. Every disagreement was quietly buried. Every insult was forgiven. Every uncomfortable holiday ended with me convincing myself that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow never changed. It only became another day where pretending seemed easier than honesty. 6 months before the birthday celebration, small cracks had started appearing. Our daughter, Soraya, had postponed her wedding without explaining why. Our son, Keenan, stopped visiting family dinners. Rowan spent longer hours at work and became strangely protective of his phone. Whenever I asked if something was wrong, everyone smiled too quickly. Everything is fine. Those 3 words became the soundtrack of our lives. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I accidentally received an email meant for Rowan. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't criminal. It was far worse. The message contained spreadsheets documenting years of loans, hidden property transfers, and financial favors exchanged among different family members. Every page depended on one assumption, that I would never know the truth. My signature had even been copied onto several authorization forms I had never seen. I stared at the screen until my coffee turned cold. Someone had forged my name. Instead of confronting anyone immediately, I quietly collected records. Bank statements. Property documents. Emails. Messages. Photographs. What began as one suspicious document slowly uncovered an entire network of secrets stretching back nearly 15 years. Money had disappeared from elderly relatives. Business debts had been hidden from spouses. One cousin secretly maintained another relationship in another city. An engagement ring had been purchased using funds borrowed from a joint account without permission. Family members weren't protecting one another. They were protecting a carefully constructed illusion. The most heartbreaking discovery involved Celestine herself. She had convinced several younger relatives to hide financial disasters from their spouses because, in her words, embarrassment was temporary while reputation lasted forever. The cost of that advice had quietly destroyed trust inside countless homes. I spent weeks wondering whether exposing everything would help anyone. Maybe silence really was kinder. Maybe people deserved the comfort of not knowing. Then I met my husband's aunt, Nora, at a grocery store. She smiled politely before suddenly asking whether I knew why her retirement savings had vanished years earlier. I froze. She believed she had simply made poor investments. She had spent years blaming herself. Walking back to my car that afternoon, I cried harder than I had cried in years. The truth was hurting innocent people every single day. The birthday celebration arrived on a bright Saturday afternoon. Golden sunlight poured through tall windows while children laughed outside in the gardens. The ballroom sparkled with white roses and soft music. Everyone wore cheerful smiles. Every table displayed framed photographs celebrating 70 years of Celestine's life. Looking around, I realized something painful. Almost every smiling face belonged to someone carrying a secret. I had prepared a respectful birthday speech. Instead, fate prepared something else. During Rowan's toast, he unexpectedly thanked everyone for protecting family unity through difficult years. Then he looked toward me. His smile disappeared. He said some people preferred creating drama instead of preserving peace. He accused me of digging into private matters that were none of my business. Finally, he pointed toward me and called me a family destroyer. The room became perfectly still. I felt every heartbeat. For a moment, I nearly apologized. Old habits almost won again. Then I remembered Aunt Nora believing she had ruined her own retirement. I remembered forged signatures. I remembered my children growing distant because they were exhausted from pretending. I calmly walked toward the microphone. I thanked Rowan for finally giving me permission to speak honestly. No shouting. No insults. Just truth. I explained that protecting a family and protecting secrets were completely different things. I held up copies of documents. One by one, I described only verified facts. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing invented. Only evidence. Expressions changed across the room. One woman realized her husband had secretly refinanced their home years earlier. Another guest discovered his business partner had blamed him for debts that never existed. A young couple learned their wedding fund had quietly been borrowed to cover someone else's gambling losses. An elderly uncle discovered property intended equally for 3 siblings had been transferred without everyone's knowledge. The room filled not with screaming but with disbelief. People stopped looking at me. They started looking at each other. Questions filled the silence. When? How long? Why didn't you tell me? The first relationship ended when a bride quietly removed her engagement ring after learning her fiancé had lied about nearly everything related to their finances. The second ended when lifelong business partners admitted years of deception. The third came when 2 sisters finally confronted decades of manipulation that had kept them divided. The fourth happened when an elderly couple acknowledged they had stayed together only because everyone expected them to. The fifth occurred between a father and adult son whose trust disappeared after hidden debts were revealed. The sixth involved close friends who admitted one had been covering lies for years. The seventh unfolded when Rowan confessed he had known about forged documents but convinced himself protecting his mother mattered more than protecting his wife. The eighth relationship to collapse was my marriage. Not because I stopped loving Rowan. Because love cannot survive where honesty is forbidden. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. Truth rarely feels victorious in the moment. It feels heavy. Painful. Almost unbearable. I quietly left the microphone and stepped outside into the warm afternoon sunshine. The garden smelled of fresh roses after a light morning rain. For the first time in years, I took a deep breath without feeling responsible for everyone else's happiness. A few minutes later, Soraya found me sitting beneath a flowering tree. Tears streamed down her face as she admitted she had postponed her wedding because she feared repeating the same patterns she had watched throughout our family. She hugged me tighter than she had hugged me since childhood. Soon Keenan joined us. He confessed he had known pieces of the truth but never believed anyone would have the courage to face it openly. Neither of my children blamed me. Instead, they thanked me. That gratitude healed wounds I didn't even know I carried. The weeks that followed were difficult. Several relatives refused to speak to me. Others apologized through handwritten letters. Some relationships ended permanently. Others slowly rebuilt themselves on honesty instead of appearances. Aunt Nora recovered part of her missing savings after legal documents were reviewed. The young couple postponed their wedding instead of rushing into a dishonest marriage. Two siblings who had barely spoken for years began meeting every Sunday for coffee. Healing wasn't immediate. But healing finally became possible. Rowan moved into a small apartment across town. Months later he asked if we could meet. We spent hours walking through a quiet botanical garden beneath bright blue skies. For the first time in our marriage, he accepted responsibility without blaming anyone else. He admitted he had confused loyalty with obedience and peace with silence. He apologized for choosing comfort over courage. His apology was sincere. I forgave him. Forgiveness, however, is not the same as returning to the life that caused the pain. We chose different paths with mutual respect. Sometimes letting go becomes the greatest act of kindness two people can offer each other. A year later, Celestine celebrated her 71st birthday in a much smaller gathering. There were fewer guests. Less luxury. No grand speeches. Only honest conversations around a simple dining table. She quietly admitted she had spent decades trying to build the perfect family instead of a truthful one. It wasn't easy for anyone to hear. But it was the first real birthday our family had ever shared. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Tales Maybe. Your support helps us continue sharing meaningful stories that remind us kindness and truth still matter. Special request * before this story ends, please leave a comment with the words, "Truth heals, even when it hurts." We'd love to read every single one. Today, when people ask me about that unforgettable birthday, they still mention the 8 relationships that ended. I remember something different. I remember the first day our family stopped pretending. Sometimes a house must be shaken before its foundation can be repaired. Sometimes silence protects pain instead of people. And sometimes the person everyone blames for breaking a family is actually the one courageous enough to give it its first real chance to heal. That bright afternoon did not destroy our family. It destroyed the lies that had imprisoned it for generations. And when the last guests finally drove away beneath the warm daylight sky, I realized something beautifully unexpected. For the first time in 22 years, I was no longer carrying the weight of everyone else's secrets. I was finally carrying my own peace.